Claire Bennett sat alone at the corner table of Evergreen Steakhouse, watching Marcus Sullivan stand and collect his coat with the careful movements of someone trying not to make a scene. 20 minutes of conversation. 20 minutes where she'd felt like a woman instead of a title, where someone had looked at her without calculating net worth or board influence, where grief had been acknowledged without the empty platitudes that usually followed. And now he was leaving because he'd finally realized something was wrong. She should let him go, should let this mistake fade into the oddity it was. Two strangers, wrong table, brief intersection of lives that would never truly align. The Armani suit she wore cost more than his truck payment. The ring on her finger, white gold, David's final gift before the accident, probably exceeded his monthly mortgage. They existed in different worlds, and pretending otherwise for 20 minutes had been reckless enough. Marcus paused at her table, those carpenter's hands gripping his coat collar. "I'm sorry for the confusion," he offered, voice carrying the warm rasp of someone who worked outdoors, who shouted instructions over power tools and didn't spend hours in climate-controlled boardrooms. "I should have checked which table. It was my fault." The words came out sharper than Claire intended, the Ice Queen voice that made junior analysts flinch. She softened it, tried again. "I knew you'd made a mistake. I should have corrected you immediately." Something flickered in his eyes, hurt, maybe, or disappointment that she'd let him talk about his daughter and his late wife while knowing it was all built on confusion. He nodded once, turned toward the exit, and Claire felt the weight of the evening collapse around her. 4 years of loneliness, of board meetings where Richard Chen suggested she find stability, of walking through her Cherry Hills mansion, hearing only echoes. 4 years of being Bennett Capital's CEO and nobody's partner, and she just let the first real connection slip away because her phone vibrated against the white tablecloth. Jessica, her assistant, the young woman who'd arranged this blind date without quite asking permission. "OMG, so sorry." Real date. Autumn Reed texted. Her car broke down on I-70. Blizzard conditions. "She's going to be 45 plus min late. I called restaurant to tell them." Claire's chest tightened. Wrong table. Wrong woman. Marcus had spent 20 minutes talking to the wrong person, and when he'd realized it, he'd thought she'd been humoring him, or worse, playing with him. The early December evening had started with Claire standing in her master bedroom, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror that had once reflected both her and David getting ready for charity galas and investor dinners. The gray Armani suit was armor, the French twist severe, the lack of jewelry except David's ring a statement, untouchable, professional, contained. At 35, she'd become exactly what the business world demanded. Sharp, cold, efficient. The board meeting yesterday had proven that. Richard Chen, her father's oldest friend and current board chairman, had closed the conference room door after the others filed out. His expression had carried that particular blend of concern and calculation that always preceded difficult conversations. "The lawsuit is escalating," he'd started, referring to the $15 million claim from an investor group alleging fraudulent misrepresentation on the 2023 Riverside development. "Our attorneys are confident, but the optics are that we're innocent of wrongdoing and will be vindicated in court." Claire had kept her voice level, professional. She'd built this response over 4 years of defending her position, of proving she could run her father's company despite being young, female, and emotionally compromised by widowhood. Richard had sighed, the sound of someone preparing to deliver an unwelcome truth. "The board is concerned about stability, about leadership that can weather this kind of storm. You've done remarkable work rebuilding it after David's death, but I'm still the grieving widow who might crack under pressure." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She'd gathered her materials, prepared to leave. "The hearing is December 28th. When we win, this conversation will be forgotten." When, not if, because losing meant more than $15 million. It meant losing the company her father had built over 40 years, the legacy that had consumed his life and ultimately hers. It meant proving every board member right who'd whispered she wasn't ready, wasn't stable, wasn't strong enough. Jessica had caught her in the parking garage, younger and earnest, and somehow convinced that her boss needed intervention beyond legal strategy. "I set up a date for you tonight. The words tumbled out before Claire could shut her down. Before you fire me, just listen. It's a blind date, totally low-key, at Evergreen Steakhouse. The woman's name is Autumn. She's an accountant, completely normal and not from our world. No one who will recognize you or care about Bennett Capital or any of it. Just dinner with someone nice. Claire should have refused. Should have explained that CEOs facing career-ending lawsuits didn't have time for blind dates with strangers. But standing in that parking garage looking at Jessica's hopeful expression, she'd remembered being young enough to believe that connection and normalcy were still possible. What time? Now, sitting in Evergreen Steakhouse at 7:40 on a December evening, Claire understood what had happened. Jessica had arranged a date with Autumn Reed. Marcus's friend, Dan, he'd mentioned, had arranged a date with a different Autumn. Both women wore green sweaters. Both were running late. And Marcus had sat down at Claire's table by mistake, had told her about his daughter Emma and his late wife Rachel and his small construction company, had looked at her like she was just a woman in a restaurant and not a CEO with a target on her back. The front door banged open, sending a gust of winter air through the dining room. A woman stumbled in, snow-covered and shaking, her red parka crusted with ice. She scanned the restaurant with desperate eyes, spotted Claire's green sweater, and lurched toward her table. "I'm so sorry." The words came out between gasps for breath. "My car died on the interstate, and my phone lost signal, and I had to get a ride with a trucker who could only take me to the exit, and I walked the rest." She broke off, staring at Claire. "You're Claire Bennett? From the app?" Yes." Claire stood automatically, instinct demanding she help this freezing woman even as her mind caught up with the absurdity. "Are you Autumn Reed?" "Yes. God, I thought I was going to have to cancel, and I felt terrible because Jessica said you never do this sort of thing, and—" Autumn's teeth were chattering, her whole body trembling from cold or exhaustion or both. Marcus appeared at Claire's shoulder, his presence solid and warm. He looked at Autumn, then at Claire, understanding dawning in stages across his face. "You're Autumn Reed?" His voice carried a note of confusion, possibly hope. Autumn turned, noticed him for the first time. Yes? "I'm Marcus Sullivan, Dan's friend. We were supposed to meet tonight." The silence that followed held all three of them suspended in the bizarre geometry of coincidence. Two blind dates, two people named Autumn, one wrong table that had led to 20 minutes of connection that Claire couldn't quite let go. Maya Torres, the restaurant manager who'd been watching the evening unfold from behind the bar, materialized with a thick blanket and a mug of something steaming. She draped the blanket around Autumn's shoulders with the practiced ease of someone who'd seen plenty of Colorado blizzard refugees. "There appear to be two reservations tonight under the name Autumn," Maya explained, her tone suggesting she found the situation more entertaining than problematic. "Miss Reed here was supposed to meet Miss Bennett." She gestured at Claire. "And there's another Autumn who was scheduled to meet—" She paused, checking her reservation book. "A Marcus Sullivan." "That Autumn called," Marcus said quietly, pulling out his phone to check messages. "She's still stuck in traffic. Says it might be another hour." Autumn wrapped the blanket tighter, looking between them. "So you two just sat together by accident?" "I sat at the wrong table," Marcus clarified, and something in his voice suggested he was still processing the implications. "Thought Claire was my date." And I didn't correct him. Claire met his eyes, watched recognition shift to something else. Not quite hurt, but close. "I should have said something immediately. I apologize." Autumn laughed, the sound slightly hysterical but genuine. "This is the strangest night I've ever had, and I just walked 2 miles through a blizzard." She looked at Claire, then at Marcus. "Look, I'm exhausted and freezing, and I honestly just want to get some food to go and find a hotel. Jessica, is there any way we could reschedule?" Claire nodded, relief and disappointment mixing uncomfortably. "Of course. Can I call you a car? Pay for your hotel?" "I'll be fine, but thank you." Autumn turned to Marcus. "And I'm really sorry about tonight. This is, God, what are the odds?" "Pretty astronomical," Marcus agreed, and Claire heard the same mix of emotions in his voice that she felt in her chest. Maya took Autumn's order for takeout, guided her toward a warm corner booth to wait, which left Claire and Marcus standing near her table, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. "I should go," Marcus offered, though he didn't move. let you enjoy your evening. My evening was supposed to be a blind date with someone named Autumn who just walked 2 miles through a snowstorm and wants to sleep. Claire heard herself say it, heard the slight tremor beneath the CEO voice she usually maintained. And before that, I spent 20 minutes talking to someone who didn't know who I was, and it was, she stopped. Couldn't finish that sentence without revealing too much. Marcus's expression softened. It was nice, he finished, even though it started with me being an idiot who can't find the right table. You weren't an idiot, you were, Claire searched for the right word, kind, genuine, real, easy to talk to. Something passed between them, a recognition that the mix-up had revealed something neither had expected to find. Marcus shifted his weight, Carpenter's hands pushing into his jacket pockets. Would you want to stay? Have dinner for real this time, now that we both know who we are? He paused. Or who we're not, since I'm apparently not your blind date and you're not mine. Claire should say no, should get in her Mercedes and drive back to the mansion and prepare for tomorrow's strategy session with her legal team. Should maintain the careful distance between her world and his, between the CEO and the foreman, between Cherry Hills and Aurora. I'd like that, she heard herself say. They returned to the corner table where everything had started. Maya brought menus with a knowing smile, the kind that suggested she'd witnessed enough human comedy to recognize when people were stumbling towards something despite themselves. Claire ordered the seared salmon, ahasham, Tiemann, Marcus, the prime rib. And for a moment they sat in the awkward silence of people who'd already shared more than strangers should and were now trying to figure out how to continue. Marcus broke it first. So, full disclosure this time. I'm Marcus Sullivan, 37, foreman at Sullivan Brothers Construction. It's a small company, just me and my younger brother Dan, and about 30 guys doing residential and light commercial work around Denver. I live in Aurora, own a modest house with a mortgage I'll be paying until Emma graduates college. I drive a 2015 F-150 that needs new shocks. And I haven't been on a date in 4 years because I spent most of that time just trying to keep my head above water after my wife died. The honesty landed like a gift. Claire took a breath, prepared to offer the same in return, but found herself editing even as she spoke. Claire Bennett, 35. I work in finance. Not a lie exactly. Bennett Capital Management was technically finance. I live in Denver, no kids, but I have a 17-year-old named Sophie who lives with me. My husband died 4 years ago in a car accident, and she paused. I haven't felt like myself since. Marcus nodded, understanding without requiring details. The accident that took Rachel, my wife. It was Christmas Eve, 2019. She was driving home from a party, hit black ice on Interstate 70 near the mountain pass. I was working late, finishing a ball so I'd have the money to buy Emma presents. She'd called around 9, asked if I was coming home soon. I said I needed 2 more hours. His voice carried the weight of 4 years' guilt, and Claire felt her own chest constrict. 2 more hours, he repeated. If I'd left then, if I'd been in the car, maybe I would have been driving. Maybe we would have taken a different route. Maybe a lot of things. Claire's hands tightened around her water glass. My husband David died Christmas Eve 2019. Interstate 70, same area. I was at an investor meeting that ran late. He called, asked if I was coming home. I said I had to stay. Marcus's eyes widened. Same night, same road. The coincidence felt like something between cosmic joke and strange comfort. 2 separate accidents, 2 families shattered, and now 4 years later, they sat across from each other in a restaurant, each carrying the particular guilt of having chosen work over presence. I tell myself it wouldn't have mattered, Marcus said quietly, that the ice was ice and the accident would have happened regardless. But at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep, I think about those 2 hours. Claire understood that arithmetic. The calculation of time against tragedy, the endless loop of what-if scenarios that grief produced. She'd spent 4 years running Bennett Capital with ruthless efficiency, proving she could honor David's memory by succeeding where others expected her to fail. But at 3 in the morning, alone in a house too large for one person, she wondered if David would have preferred a wife who chose him over the investor meeting. Their food arrived. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the conversation having gone deeper, faster than either had planned. Claire watched Marcus cut his prime rib with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to make things last, to waste nothing. His hands bore the evidence of physical labor, calluses, a scar along one thumb, nails trimmed short and practical. David's hands had been soft, moisturized, the hands of someone who signed contracts rather than built structures. "Tell me about Emma," Claire said, wanting to shift toward lighter ground. Marcus's whole demeanor changed, the grief weight lifting as he talked about his daughter. 8 years old, third grade, talented at art and obsessed with making things. She'd recently decided she wanted to be an architect, had spent hours drawing elaborate houses with impossible geometry that Marcus had to gently explain wouldn't quite work with actual physics and building codes. "She asked me this morning if her mom would want her to have a new mom," Marcus said, and Claire heard the pain beneath the words. "She's 8. She shouldn't have to worry about my happiness or whether I'm lonely." But kids see things adults try to hide. Claire thought about Sophie, 17 and sharp, and carrying her own complicated grief. David's daughter from his first marriage, a child Claire had no legal obligation to after his death, but couldn't imagine abandoning. Sophie had been 13 when David died, old enough to understand loss and young enough to need stability. Claire had kept her, adopted her formally 2 years ago, gave her the Bennett name and a trust fund, and everything except the things Sophie probably needed most: a parent who wasn't constantly fighting corporate battles and nursing old wounds. "Sophie's been asking when I'm going to start living again instead of just existing," Claire admitted. "She's probably right, but it's easier to stay busy than to risk," she paused. "Than to risk this." This? Feeling something, connecting with someone, opening the door to potentially losing again. Claire surprised herself with the honesty. Something about Marcus invited it, his own vulnerability creating space for hers. He nodded slowly. "Dan, my brother and business partner, he set this whole thing up. Said I needed to stop using Emma as an excuse to avoid life. That Rachel would be furious if she knew I was using her memory as a shield." Marcus smiled, sad but genuine. "He's probably right. Doesn't make it easier." Their conversation wandered through safer territory: Denver, the mountains in winter, favorite restaurants, and hiking trails. Marcus talked about job sites with the passion of someone who genuinely loved his work, who found satisfaction in seeing structures rise from foundation to completion. Claire found herself relaxing, letting go of the CEO posture, laughing at his stories about construction site mishaps and Emma's increasingly elaborate architectural drawings. At 10:15, Maya approached their table with apologetic smile. "I hate to interrupt, but we're closing soon. You're welcome to stay a bit longer, but we should go," Claire said, checking her phone and startled by how much time had passed. 3 hours. She'd sat with Marcus for 3 hours and barely noticed the restaurant emptying around them. Marcus paid the check despite Claire's attempt to split it, and they walked out into the December night. The snow had stopped, leaving Denver blanketed in fresh white that sparkled under streetlights. Claire's Mercedes sat in the parking lot. She'd driven herself, unwilling to have a driver witness what she'd expected to be an awkward blind date. Now she was grateful for the privacy, even as she dreaded Marcus seeing the car and recognizing the gap between their financial realities. "Thank you for staying," Marcus said as they approached the vehicles, "for giving me a chance after I sat at the wrong table like an idiot." "You weren't an idiot. You were," Claire searched for words. "You were the first person in 4 years who talked to me like a regular person instead of—" She stopped, not wanting to reveal too much. "Instead of someone who needs careful handling." Marcus stepped closer, and Claire's breath caught. In the parking lot light, she could see the gray threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from squinting into sun on job sites, the fundamental solidness of someone who'd built his life with physical effort rather than inherited wealth or corporate maneuvering. "Can I see you again?" His voice carried hope and hesitation in equal measure. "Maybe bring Emma and Sophie? Emma's been begging me to let her make Christmas ornaments in my workshop. And I thought, if you're not busy tomorrow..." Tomorrow was Saturday. Claire had planned to spend it preparing for Monday's legal strategy session, reviewing depositions and financial records until her eyes burned. But standing in the parking lot with Marcus, watching his careful hopefulness, she felt something shift in her chest. "We'd like that," she said. "What time?" They exchanged numbers, made plans for 2 o'clock the next afternoon. Marcus offered to pick them up, but Claire deflected, said she'd drive, gave him an address for an apartment building downtown rather than her Cherry Hills mansion. The lie tasted bitter, but telling the truth felt impossible. He didn't know she was CEO of Bennett Capital Management, didn't know about the lawsuit or the board pressure, or the fact that her net worth exceeded his annual revenue by factors he probably couldn't imagine. And for one more day, she wanted to keep it that way. Marcus walked her to the Mercedes, there was no avoiding it, and she watched his expression shift slightly as he registered the S-Class designation, the pristine condition that suggested regular professional detailing. But he didn't comment, just opened the driver's door for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "Drive safe," he said. "Text me when you get home." "I will." For a moment, they stood close enough that Claire could feel his warmth against the December cold, could smell sawdust and some subtle cologne. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull back, and pressed a kiss to her cheek. Brief, gentle, appropriate, but it sent electricity through her nervous system in a way that hadn't happened since David. Marcus stepped back. "Good night, Claire." "Good night." She drove back to Cherry Hills in a haze, mind replaying the evening's strange geometry. Wrong table, right connection. A widower and a widow who'd lost their partners on the same night, same road, now finding each other 4 years later, through coincidence that felt almost scripted. The universe's sense of humor or its mercy, she couldn't decide. The mansion rose from its manicured lawn like a monument to success that felt increasingly hollow. Claire let herself in through the 3-car garage, kicked off her heels in the mudroom, and found Sophie in the media room watching something on the large screen. "How was the date?" Sophie didn't look away from the television, but her tone carried more interest than her posture suggested. "Complicated." Claire sank onto the leather sectional. "I sat at the wrong table and spent 20 minutes talking to someone else's date. Then my actual date showed up, exhausted and freezing, and just wanted to go to a hotel. So I ended up having dinner with the wrong table guy." Sophie finally turned, eyebrow raised. "That's the most interesting thing you've said in 6 months. What's wrong table guy like?" Claire hesitated, not sure how to compress Marcus into a description. "He's a construction foreman, single dad with an 8-year-old daughter. Lost his wife the same night David died. She paused. "He's kind and genuine, and he doesn't know you're you." Sophie finished the sentence with the perception that had always made her seem older than 17. "Doesn't know about Bennett Capital or the lawsuit or any of it." "Not yet." "Are you going to tell him?" "I have to, just not—" Claire struggled with the timing. "Not tomorrow. He invited us to his house for Emma to make Christmas ornaments in his workshop. I want Sophie to meet them first." Sophie studied her for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Since David's death, she'd been protective but distant, allowing Claire to parent from a professional distance that kept emotional exposure minimal for both of them. Now she looked almost hopeful. "So I'm meeting the 8-year-old daughter of a guy you've known for 3 hours? If you want to, you can say no." Sophie turned back to the television, but Claire caught the small smile. "What time tomorrow?" Marcus's house in Aurora was everything Claire's mansion wasn't. Small, lived in, filled with evidence of actual life being lived. They arrived at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, Claire having driven her Mercedes to a parking garage downtown and taken an Uber from there to avoid the visual disconnect of pulling up in a $100,000 vehicle. Sophie had rolled her eyes at the subterfuge but hadn't argued. Emma exploded from the front door before Marcus could stop her, a whirlwind of 8-year-old energy in paint-stained jeans and a t-shirt declaring her love for unicorns. She grabbed Sophie's hand without introduction or hesitation. "I'm Emma, and I'm 8, and Daddy said you might come make ornaments with and I already set everything up in the workshop." The words tumbled out in a breathless rush. "Do you like painting? I have 10 different colors and also glitter. But Daddy says we can't use too much glitter because he's still finding it from last Christmas." Sophie, who'd been sullen and resistant during the Uber ride, looked startled by the assault of enthusiasm. Claire watched her younger daughters, face soften despite obvious efforts to maintain teenage cool. "I'm Sophie. I'm 17, and I've never made wooden ornaments before." That's okay. I'll teach you. Emma tugged Sophie toward the detached garage that served as Marcus's workshop, not bothering to wait for permission or adult supervision. Marcus appeared in the doorway wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking nothing like the corporate executives Claire usually dealt with, and somehow more appealing because of it. Sorry about the ambush. Emma's been vibrating with excitement since I told her you were coming. His smile carried warmth and slight embarrassment. She doesn't get a lot of visitors her own age. Or any age, really. I'm not exactly social butterfly material these days. Claire gestured toward the workshop where Emma's voice could be heard, explaining her ornament plans in enthusiastic detail. Should we rescue Sophie? Let's give them a minute. Emma's surprisingly good at breaking down walls. Marcus led Claire inside through a living room that bore all the hallmarks of single-father occupancy. Clean but cluttered, decorated with Emma's artwork taped to walls, furniture that prioritized comfort over style. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, already decorated with a chaotic mix of ornaments that suggested Emma had been given creative freedom. The kitchen was small, functional, smelling faintly of coffee and cinnamon. Marcus poured them each a cup from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since morning, strong enough to strip paint. Sorry, I probably should have made fresh. It's fine. Claire accepted the mug. Noticed the crack along one side had been carefully glued. Making do, making things last. So different from her world of replacing rather than repairing, of disposable luxury and constant upgrading. Through the kitchen window, Claire could see into the workshop. Emma had already equipped Sophie with safety goggles that looked absurdly large on her face, was demonstrating how to sand the rough edges off a piece of pine. Sophie bent over the work with surprising focus, and Claire felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope, maybe, that her closed-off teenage daughter might find connection with an 8-year-old who hadn't yet learned to guard her heart. She's good with her, Claire observed. Marcus leaned against the counter beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Emma has that effect. She hasn't figured out yet that people might not want her attention, so she just gives it freely and somehow makes them want it back. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughters through the window. Claire noticed details of Marcus's life scattered around the kitchen. Emma's spelling tests held to the refrigerator with magnets, a work schedule marked with colored highlighters, bills stacked neatly near the phone. The electric bill on top showed a number that made Claire's chest tighten with realization of how different their financial realities were. She spent more on her gardener than Marcus's monthly utilities. You said you work in finance, Marcus said carefully, as if choosing his words with deliberation. That's pretty broad. Accounting, investment banking, one of those hedge fund things I don't really understand. Claire's hands tightened around the coffee mug. This was the moment to tell him, to explain that she didn't just work in finance, she ran one of Denver's largest commercial real estate investment firms, that her salary alone would exceed his company's annual revenue, that the lawsuit threatening her career involved more money than he'd likely see in his lifetime. Investment management, she said instead, hating herself for the continued half-truth. Real estate focused. Sounds intense. Emma asks what I do, and I can show her buildings we've worked on. Seems like it would be harder to explain investment management to a kid. It is. Claire turned away from the window to face him. Marcus, there's something I should... A crash from the workshop interrupted her, followed by Emma's voice. It's okay. We didn't break anything important. Marcus sighed but smiled. That's my cue. Come on, we should probably supervise before they decide to use the power tools unsupervised. The workshop smelled like sawdust and wood stain, warm despite the December cold outside. Marcus had set up a workspace with pieces of pine and cedar, sandpaper and various grits, and small jars of paint in Christmas colors. Emma had already created what appeared to be a star, though its points weren't exactly symmetrical. Sophie worked on a simple circle, but even from the doorway, Claire could see her concentrating with the intensity she usually reserved for science homework. Marcus moved between them with easy competence, showing Emma how to smooth a rough edge, explaining to Sophie why certain woods took paint differently than others. He spoke with his hands, demonstrating techniques, his whole body engaged in the teaching. Claire found herself watching the way his shoulders moved under the flannel, the careful attention he gave both girls, the patience that suggested this wasn't performance but genuine care. Claire, you wanted to try? Emma held up a template shaped like a snowflake. This one's pretty, but Daddy says it's advanced difficulty, which means it's hard, but we can do it if we're careful. Claire accepted the template, took a seat on a stool beside Sophie. Marcus handed her a piece of cedar and a pencil for tracing, his fingers brushing hers in a way that sent heat up her arm. She traced the pattern, began cutting carefully with the scroll saw he showed her how to operate, and lost herself in the simple pleasure of making something with her hands. She couldn't remember the last time she'd done anything creative. Her days were spreadsheets and legal documents, contracts and negotiations. Making something physical felt almost transgressive, a rebellion against the corporate existence that had consumed her life since David's death. Sophie worked beside her with silent concentration, creating her ornaments with mathematical precision that made Emma's enthusiastic chaos look even more chaotic by comparison. But something had shifted in Sophie's face, a softness around her eyes, a small smile when Emma praised her work. Claire realized with a pang that this was the first time in months she'd seen her daughter look genuinely relaxed. Time disappeared into sawdust and paint. Emma maintained a running commentary on everything from school drama to her opinions on various cartoon characters to questions about whether Sophie liked pickles, because Emma thought pickles were disgusting, but her friend Madison loved them. Sophie answered with increasing engagement, dropping the teenage guardedness degree by degree. Marcus worked near Claire, ostensibly on his own ornament, but mostly supervising and offering guidance. They fell into an easy rhythm, passing tools back and forth, occasionally bumping shoulders in the small space. The physical proximity felt both dangerous and necessary, like testing a frozen lake to see if it would hold weight. "So in your real estate investment work, do you ever deal with construction?" Marcus asked as he helped Claire sand the edges of her snowflake. "Or is it all high-level financial stuff?" Claire chose her words carefully. "I deal with development projects, so construction is part of it. But I'm usually looking at spreadsheets about construction rather than being on job sites." "That's too bad. There's something satisfying about being on site, seeing the work happen in real time. The smell of fresh lumber, the sound of hammers and saws. I couldn't do your job. Staring at screens all day would make me crazy." "It does sometimes," Claire admitted. "Make me crazy, I mean. I spend most of my time in meetings or reviewing documents. Days can pass where I don't see sunlight. She gestured at the workshop, the simple act of creation. "This is the first time in months I've made something with my hands." Marcus studied her, something shifting in his expression. "You should do it more often. You're good at it." Emma interrupted with demands that everyone see her latest creation, a tree that leaned dramatically to one side, but which she insisted was artistic interpretation of how trees looked when wind was blowing. Sophie praised it with unexpected sincerity, and Emma beamed before launching into plans for her next 5 ornaments. They worked until almost 6 o'clock, the workshop growing dark until Marcus turned on overhead lights that cast everything in warm yellow glow. Emma showed Sophie her collection of finished ornaments, explaining the story behind each one with the detailed enthusiasm of someone who'd created entire mythologies around painted wooden shapes. When it was finally time to leave, Emma hugged Claire without asking permission first, arms tight around her waist. "You smell like cinnamon," Emma declared. "Can you come back again? Please, we still have so many more ornaments to make." And Sophie said she wanted to help me with the really hard ones. And "Emma, breathe," Marcus interrupted gently. "Let them decide if they want to come back without you guilt-tripping them." Sophie looked at Claire, something uncertain in her expression. Claire recognized that look. Sophie asking permission to want something, to hope for connection. It had been so long since she'd seen it. "We'd love to come back," Claire said, and watched Sophie's face light up in a way that made her chest ache. Marcus offered to drive them home, and this time Claire couldn't deflect without it seeming strange. She gave the address for the downtown apartment building she'd used as cover, hoping he wouldn't question why someone who worked in high-level finance lived in a modest rental. The lie was growing, expanding, taking on weight that would eventually become unsupportable. But sitting in Marcus's truck with Sophie in the back seat and Emma's endless chatter filling the space, Claire couldn't bring herself to burst the bubble yet. At the apartment building, Marcus walked them to the door despite the cold. "Tomorrow," he said, If you're free, Emma wants to bake cookies, and I'm terrible at baking. Would you and Sophie want to come over? Make it an actual Christmas activity instead of me burning pre-made dough from a tube? Claire should say no. Should create distance before the lie became too large to unwind. But Sophie was looking at her with something like hope, and Marcus's expression held the same carefully guarded optimism, and she was so tired of saying no to everything except work. What time? Sunday morning arrived with Emma's voice echoing through Marcus's house before Claire and Sophie had even reached the front door. The 8-year-old had apparently been watching from the window because she flung it open mid-knock and launched into an explanation of her cookie-making plans that involved no fewer than 6 different types of decorations and something called architectural frosting that she'd seen on a baking show. Marcus appeared behind his daughter, hair still damp from a shower, wearing jeans and a Henley that made Claire's mouth go dry in ways she'd forgotten were possible. 4 years of careful emotional containment and a construction foreman in casual weekend clothes was dismantling her defenses with nothing more than an apologetic smile. She's been up since 6 planning this, he offered by way of explanation or apology. Claire couldn't tell which. I tried to explain that people might not share her enthusiasm for gingerbread structural engineering, but apparently I don't understand the importance of edible architecture. Emma had already grabbed Sophie's hand and was pulling her toward the kitchen, chattering about cookie cutters and whether snowflakes needed to be symmetrical or if asymmetry was more realistic. Sophie shot Claire a look that might have been pleading for rescue or might have been cautious excitement. Hard to tell with Sophie, who'd spent the past 4 years perfecting emotional ambiguity as a defense mechanism. Claire followed Marcus into the kitchen, smaller and warmer than her restaurant-sized setup at the Cherry Hills house. Flour already dusted the counters, mixing bowls waited in a neat row, and the oven was preheating with the kind of domestic preparation that suggested Marcus had put actual thought into this despite claiming incompetence at baking. Coffee? He was already pouring before she answered, the same cracked mug from yesterday. Claire accepted it, noting the way his hand lingered near hers, not quite touching, but close enough to send electricity up her arm. Emma had commandeered Sophie into measuring flour, providing detailed instructions with the confidence of someone who'd clearly done this before, despite being 8. Sophie listened with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for AP chemistry, and Claire realized with a strange pang that her daughter, not daughter Ward, adopted sister, the definition still tangled 4 years later. Hadn't had much opportunity for simple joy since David died. The guilt of that realization mixed with the larger guilt Claire carried about the lies she was actively maintaining. Marcus thought she was Claire Bennett, who worked in finance. Not Claire Bennett, whose face appeared in Denver Business Journal articles about female CEOs and whose company was currently fighting for survival against a $15 million lawsuit. He thought she lived in a modest downtown apartment, not a Cherry Hills mansion that could fit his entire house in the foyer. Marcus moved around the kitchen with the same competent ease he'd shown in the workshop, pulling ingredients from cabinets, setting up workstations for the girls. His hands moved with purpose and precision. Carpenter's hands that knew how to create and shape and build. Claire found herself watching those hands more than was probably appropriate, imagining them. You're staring. Marcus's voice held amusement rather than accusation. Claire felt heat climb her neck. Just impressed by your organizational skills. You said you were bad at baking. I'm bad at the actual baking part. The preparation I can handle. It's basically just carpentry with ingredients instead of lumber. But the chemistry of it, the timing and temperatures, that's where I fall apart. He handed her a wooden spoon and a bowl, which is where you come in. They fell into a rhythm, mixing dough while Emma supervised with the authority of a pint-sized Gordon Ramsay. Sophie cracked eggs with surprising care, and when Emma declared her technique almost perfect, but you need to do it faster next time, Sophie actually laughed instead of retreating into sullen silence. The dough came together under their hands, sticky and sweet-smelling. Emma insisted they needed to make at least 40 cookies to ensure proper decoration variety, which led to Marcus explaining basic math about oven capacity and baking time. Emma countered with her own math about efficiency and parallel baking processes, and Claire watched Marcus navigate his daughter's stubborn brilliance with patient good humor. She gets this from Rachel, he murmured, while Emma detailed her baking timeline to Sophie. The stubborn certainty that her way is the right way and everyone else just needs better explanations. Rachel was a second-grade teacher. She had this gift for making complicated things simple without being condescending. Claire rolled out dough on the floured counter, focusing on the rolling pin to avoid looking at Marcus while he talked about his dead wife. These moments always carried a strange tension, honoring the grief while acknowledging the present, walking the line between respect for the past and permission for the future. Sophie gets her intensity from David, Claire offered. He was an investor, very analytical, could look at a project and see all the variables and outcomes like he was running simulations in his head. Sophie has that same quality, seeing patterns and connections that most people miss. Marcus added more flour to her workspace, his shoulder brushing hers. Do you miss him? Or is that a stupid question? Of course you miss him. Claire paused, considering. Did she miss David? She missed the idea of partnership, of having someone who shared her life. But the specific dailiness of David himself had faded, leaving behind something more like absence than longing. I miss having someone, she said carefully. Having a person who knows your routines and remembers how you take your coffee and can finish your sentences. But the actual him? She stopped, surprised by her own honesty. Sometimes I think I've forgotten him. Not that he existed, but the details. The way he laughed or what his voice sounded like. And that feels like betrayal. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then offered his own truth in return. I have videos of Rachel on my phone. Emma asked to watch them about 6 months ago, and I realized I hadn't looked at them in over a year. And when I played them, she seemed like, not a stranger exactly, but someone I used to know. Like running into an old friend from college and realizing you've both changed so much that the history doesn't quite connect to the present. Does that make us terrible people? Claire asked, only half joking. Probably just makes us human. Marcus met her eyes, something shifting in his expression. And maybe means we're ready to stop living in the past. Emma's voice cut through the moment. Daddy, the cookies are ready to cut. And Sophie says she can make a snowflake with perfect symmetry if we let her use the template. They spent the next hour cutting shapes from dough. Emma's enthusiastic stars and trees, Sophie's geometrically precise snowflakes, Marcus's surprisingly skilled reindeer, and Claire's attempts at various shapes that mostly resembled abstract art rather than recognizable Christmas imagery. The oven worked overtime, baking sheet after sheet while the kitchen filled with the warm scent of ginger and cinnamon. Claire's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, buzzed again and again. Finally, while the girls were debating frosting colors with the seriousness of international treaty negotiations, she checked her messages. Jessica, her assistant, emergency board meeting called for tomorrow, Monday. Richard wants to discuss leadership contingencies before the hearing Wednesday. I think they're planning something. Claire's stomach dropped. Leadership contingencies meant they were preparing to remove her. The hearing was December 28th, 3 days away. If Richard and the board were moving now, before the verdict, it meant they'd lost confidence in her ability to win. Everything okay? Marcus had moved beside her, concern evident in his voice. Claire forced her expression neutral, slipped the phone back into her pocket. Just work stuff. Someone wants a meeting tomorrow that I'll need to prepare for. On Sunday night? Marcus frowned. That seems excessive. Finance doesn't really observe weekends when deadlines approach. Not a lie, exactly, just not the complete truth about which deadline she meant and what the stakes actually were. Emma declared the first batch of cookies cool enough to decorate, which launched a new phase of activity involving frosting bags and enough sprinkles to coat the floor in a thin layer of sugar. Sophie and Emma worked side by side, Sophie's careful precision creating cookies that looked professional, while Emma's enthusiastic application of frosting resulted in cookies that were more icing than gingerbread. Marcus loaded a frosting bag with green icing and handed it to Claire. Try that reindeer you made, the lopsided one with 3 legs. It has 4 legs. They're just not all visible from this angle. That's generous. But he was smiling, standing close enough that Claire could feel his warmth against her side. She focused on the cookie, piping green frosting around what might have been antlers, or might have been abstract expressionism. Marcus worked beside her on his own cookies, and their hands kept brushing in the small space, each contact sending sparks up her arm. Claire. His voice had dropped lower, private, despite the girl's chatter filling the kitchen. I know we've only known each other a few days, and I know this is probably too fast and definitely too complicated, but I need to tell you something. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. She should stop him, should tell him the truth before he said whatever he was about to say, but she couldn't make the words come. I haven't felt like this since Rachel. Marcus set down his frosting bag, turned to face her fully. Haven't felt like I could breathe properly around someone, or like my day gets better just because I might see them. And maybe it's too soon, or maybe I'm reading this completely wrong, but I think you feel it too. She did. God help her, she absolutely did. Standing in his small kitchen, decorating misshapen cookies, while flour coated her designer jeans and her carefully maintained CEO composure crumbled, Claire felt more alive than she had in 4 years. I feel it, she whispered. But Marcus, there are things you don't know about me. Things that might change. Daddy! Claire, look! Emma held up a cookie decorated with such aggressive enthusiasm that it looked more like modern art than traditional Christmas fare. It's you two. The tall one is Claire, and the shorter one is you, and the middle ones are me and Sophie. Marcus laughed, the moment broken, but the tension still humming between them. That's beautiful, sweetie. Very abstract. They decorated cookies until early evening, the pile of finished products ranging from Sophie's professional quality snowflakes to Emma's Jackson Pollock interpretations of Christmas themes. When it was finally time to leave, Emma packed cookies into containers for them to take home, insisting they each needed at least a dozen despite Claire's protests about sugar consumption. At the door, Marcus caught Claire's hand. Tomorrow night. Can I take you to dinner? Just the two of us, no kids. Actual date. Claire thought about the emergency board meeting, about the preparation she needed to do, about the lawsuit hearing looming Wednesday like an executioner's blade. She thought about all the reasons she should say no. Yes, she heard herself say. Christmas Eve morning broke cold and crystalline, Denver wrapped in the kind of December clarity that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Claire woke in her Cherry Hills bedroom to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages, all variations on the same theme. Richard wanted to move up the emergency board meeting to this afternoon, Christmas Eve afternoon, which meant the situation was even worse than she'd thought. She spent an hour on conference calls with her legal team, reviewing depositions and strategy, while staring out her bedroom window at grounds maintained by a landscaping crew she rarely saw. The irony wasn't lost on her. She lived in a house large enough to get lost in, surrounded by evidence of wealth and success, and she'd spent the past week pretending to be someone who rented a modest apartment and worked a normal finance job. The lies were becoming unbearable. Tonight she'd tell Marcus everything. After the board meeting, after she'd salvaged what she could of her position, she'd sit him down and explain who she actually was and hope he'd understand why she'd hidden it. Her phone rang. Marcus, not a number, but the contact she'd saved yesterday with more hope than wisdom. I know this is terrible timing, he started, but Emma woke up with this idea about making cinnamon rolls for Christmas morning, and she remembered you mentioning your mom used to make them, and now she's convinced we need to learn the recipe today so we can make them tomorrow. Any chance you and Sophie could come over this morning? I promise it's the last baking emergency I'll subject you to. Claire checked the time, 9:30. The board meeting was at 4. She had hours to prepare, hours to review documents she'd already memorized. Or she could spend a few hours in Marcus's kitchen learning to make cinnamon rolls and pretending her world wasn't potentially imploding this afternoon. We'll be there in an hour, she said. Sophie was already awake, reading in her room, still wearing the University of Colorado Boulder sweatshirt she'd received in yesterday's mail, along with her early admission acceptance letter. The scholarship had come through, full academic and athletic for track, which meant Sophie's college was secured regardless of what happened to Bennett Capital. Small mercy in the middle of crisis. We're going to Marcus's? Sophie looked up from her book, something uncertain in her expression. Emma wants to learn to make cinnamon rolls. You can stay here if you want. Sophie set down her book. No, I'll come. She's actually kind of cool. for an 8-year-old. They drove to Aurora in Claire's Mercedes, no longer bothering with the Uber subterfuge around Sophie. Her daughter, Ward's sister, the label still tangled, knew about the lies even if she didn't approve of them. "You're going to tell him today, right?" Sophie asked as they pulled onto Marcus's street. "Because this is getting weird. He thinks you're a regular finance person, Claire, and you're actually runs a $200 million company, Claire." "Tonight," Claire promised, "after my board meeting." "The one where they try to fire you?" "They can't fire me. I own 40% of the company." But even as she said it, Claire knew board mechanics could be complicated. Richard and his allies controlled enough votes to make her life miserable, even if they couldn't technically remove her. Marcus met them at the door, Emma bouncing beside him with a handwritten list of ingredients and a cookbook open to a page marked with at least 5 different sticky notes. The kitchen smelled like coffee and something burning. Toast, Claire realized, seeing the smoking remains in the sink. "Breakfast went poorly," Marcus admitted. "Emma tried to make eggs, and I got distracted helping her, and the toast became charcoal. So we're all in this together. Either we successfully make cinnamon rolls, or we order pizza for Christmas breakfast." Emma had already grabbed Sophie and was explaining her color-coded system for organizing the recipe steps. Sophie listened with the careful attention she gave to complex problems, occasionally asking clarifying questions that made Emma light up with the joy of being taken seriously. Claire and Marcus worked on the dough while the girls prepared the filling. The recipe was more complex than cookies. Rising time, kneading technique, temperature precision. Marcus followed instructions with the same careful attention he'd given to showing Emma how to sand ornaments, measuring flour with contractor's precision. "So this emergency meeting tonight," Marcus said quietly while the girls debated cinnamon to sugar ratios. "Is it the kind of thing that's going to ruin your Christmas, or just the kind that's going to be stressful?" Claire's hands stilled in the dough. "Potentially the kind that changes everything." He looked at her then, really looked, seeing past whatever careful mask she'd been maintaining. "You want to talk about it?" She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to explain about Bennett Capital and the lawsuit and the board machinations and the fact that she'd been lying to him about her identity for a week. But standing in his kitchen with flour on her hands and Emma's laughter filling the air, the truth felt too heavy to introduce. "After tonight," she said, "after the meeting, I'll explain everything. I promise." The dough rose while they drank coffee and watched the girls create what Emma called a filling prototype system that involved at least 7 different test batches of cinnamon sugar. Marcus stood close enough that their shoulders touched, and Claire let herself lean into him, stealing this moment of peace before the afternoon's confrontation. When the dough had risen, Emma supervised the rolling process with the intensity of a drill sergeant, insisting on specific measurements and even distribution. Sophie handled the rolling pin with surprising competence, and together they created something that actually resembled proper cinnamon rolls rather than vaguely circular blobs. The rolls went into the oven, and Emma set a timer with the gravity of someone defusing a bomb. While they waited, Marcus showed them his Christmas tree, covered in ornaments from what appeared to be every year of Emma's life, a chronicle of her childhood rendered in painted wood and construction paper and macaroni. Claire's phone buzzed. "Jessica, Richard moved the meeting up to 2 p.m. Says it's urgent. 2 o'clock, 2 hours from now." Claire felt her chest tighten. "I need to go," she said, hating the words even as she spoke them. "The meeting got moved up. I'm sorry, Emma. We won't be here when the rolls come out." Emma's face fell, then brightened with the resilience of childhood. "That's okay. You can come back tomorrow for Christmas breakfast and eat them then." Marcus walked her to the door while Sophie collected their things. In the privacy of the entryway, he caught her hand. "Whatever this meeting is, whatever's happening at work, you'll get through it." His voice carried conviction she didn't feel herself. Claire squeezed his hand, trying to memorize the warmth of his palm against hers. "Tonight. I'll call you tonight after it's done, and I'll explain everything." He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her in a hug that felt like shelter. Claire pressed her face against his chest, breathing in sawdust and detergent and something essentially Marcus, trying to store it up against whatever was coming. "I'll be waiting," he whispered against her hair. The emergency board meeting took place in Bennett Capital's downtown conference room, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Denver's skyline decorated for Christmas. Claire arrived 15 minutes early, wearing her sharpest suit and highest heels, armor against whatever Richard had planned. The board filed in: Richard Chen, Margaret Holloway, James Park, David Foster, Alexandra Morrison. 5 voting members plus Claire herself. Richard had 3 solid votes, including his own. Margaret usually sided with Claire. James and Alexandra were wild cards, swayed by whoever made the strongest argument. Richard didn't waste time on pleasantries. Thank you all for coming on Christmas Eve. I know this is difficult timing, but given the circumstances, we felt it necessary to discuss leadership contingencies before Wednesday's hearing. Claire kept her expression neutral, let him talk. The plaintiff's legal team has been aggressive in discovery. They've uncovered some communications that could be problematic. Internal emails about timeline projections for the Riverside development that may contradict our public statements. Richard pulled out documents, slid them across the table. If these are presented in court, they could significantly damage our defense. Claire scanned the emails, recognized them from months ago. Ordinary business communications about construction delays and projected completion dates. Nothing fraudulent, nothing that contradicted public statements. Just normal course of business documentation that could be twisted by a skilled attorney into looking suspicious. These don't show fraud, Claire said evenly. They show good faith estimates that evolved as the project progressed. That's standard practice. Perhaps, Richard leaned back in his chair. But perception matters, especially in a jury trial. And the board needs to consider what happens if we lose. $15 million would be survivable, but the reputational damage, he paused. The board has discussed whether it might be prudent to have interim leadership in place. Someone who could step in if the verdict goes against us and you need to step back temporarily to deal with the fallout. There it was, the knife politely sheathed but unmistakably present. Richard wanted her removed now, before the hearing, so he could position the company as having taken corrective action regardless of the verdict. Interim leadership, Claire kept her voice level. You mean removing me as CEO before we've even lost the case we're not going to lose? Margaret spoke up, tone conciliatory. No one's talking about removing you, Claire. Just having a contingency plan. A contingency that involves me stepping down. Claire looked at each board member in turn. Let me be clear. I built this company alongside my father for 15 years before his death. I've run it successfully for 4 years since David died. The Riverside development was my project, and the plaintiff's claims are baseless. We will win Wednesday's hearing, and this conversation will be moot. James Park shuffled papers, uncomfortable. Claire, we all respect your work, but Richard makes a valid point about optics. If there's even a small chance the verdict goes against us. There isn't. Claire stood, done with the pretense of collegial discussion. I appreciate the board's concern, but I won't be stepping down. Not before the hearing, not after if we lose, which we won't. If anyone wants to challenge my leadership, feel free to call for a vote. Otherwise, I'll see you all after Christmas when we're celebrating our legal victory. She walked out before anyone could respond, heels clicking against marble floors, rage and fear warring in her chest. In her office, she slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. Emma's cinnamon rolls are perfect. She's very proud. How did your meeting go? Claire stared at the message, at the simple question from someone who thought she was regular finance job Claire dealing with a stressful meeting. Someone who had no idea she'd just walked out of a room where her own board had tried to preemptively remove her from the company her father built. She should call him. Should explain everything right now, get it over with. But her hands were shaking, and her voice wouldn't be steady, and she couldn't bear to hear whatever would happen when he learned the truth. Meeting was rough. Can I call you later? She typed back. His response came immediately. Of course, whatever you need, I'm here. Claire closed her eyes against unexpected tears. He was there, but he was there for someone who didn't actually exist. For regular Claire who worked in finance, and lived in a modest apartment and had normal-sized problems. Not for CEO Claire, who ran a $200 million company and lived in a mansion and was currently fighting for professional survival. She drove home through Christmas Eve traffic, Denver decorated and festive while her world crumbled. The mansion felt even larger and emptier than usual. Sophie was in her room, door closed, music playing loud enough to signal she didn't want to be disturbed. Claire changed out of her suit, put on jeans and a sweater, poured herself a scotch she didn't drink. stood in her kitchen that could fit Marcus's entire house and felt the weight of her lies pressing down. She'd built this cage herself, the deception about who she was, the pretense of being someone simpler and easier, and now she was trapped in it. Her phone rang. Marcus again. She let it go to voicemail, couldn't trust her voice. He left a message. Hey, just checking on you. Emma wants to know if you're still coming for Christmas breakfast tomorrow. No pressure if you can't, she'll understand. But we'd love to see you, both of you. Call me when you can. The longing in his voice nearly broke her. Claire called him back before she could lose courage. I'm sorry about earlier, she started. The meeting it was bad, really bad. Do you want to talk about it? His voice carried concern and something else, something tender that made her chest ache. I want to tell you everything, but not over the phone. Can we? She paused. Can I come over? Now, I know it's late and it's Christmas Eve, but I need to see you. Silence on the other end. Then, Emma's already asleep, but yes, come over. I'll be waiting. Claire drove to Aurora at 9:30 on Christmas Eve, her Mercedes feeling like a confession on wheels as she pulled up to Marcus's modest house. He opened the door before she could knock, concern evident in his expression. Inside, the house was quiet, Christmas tree lights providing soft illumination. Marcus led her to the living room, sat beside her on the couch that had clearly seen better days, but was comfortable in the way that only well-used furniture achieved. What happened? He asked. Claire took a breath, prepared to tell him everything. My job isn't exactly what I said. I don't just work in finance. Her phone rang, cutting her off. Jessica, calling at 9:45 on Christmas Eve, which meant emergency. I'm sorry, I need to take this. Jessica's voice came through tight with stress. The plaintiff's attorneys just filed emergency motions. They're claiming they have new evidence of intentional misrepresentation. The judge moved the hearing to tomorrow, Christmas Day, 10 a.m. Richard's already called the board. He's pushing for your resignation before the hearing. Claire felt the floor drop out. Christmas Day? Can they do that? Judge thinks the evidence is significant enough to expedite. I'm sorry, Claire. I know this ruins your holiday. Claire hung up, looked at Marcus. He was watching her with growing concern. I have to go, she said. I'm sorry. There's a hearing tomorrow morning, and I need to prepare. I'll explain everything after, I promise. Marcus caught her hand as she stood. Claire, what's going on? A hearing on Christmas Day? That's not normal finance work. She pulled away, couldn't look at him. I'll tell you everything tomorrow, after the hearing. I need to get through tomorrow first. Whatever it is, I can help. Let me help you. Claire finally met his eyes, saw genuine concern and confusion and the beginning of hurt. You can't help with this. Nobody can. I'm sorry, Marcus. I need to go. She fled before he could stop her, drove home through empty streets while her phone exploded with messages from her legal team. Spent Christmas Eve reviewing documents and preparing arguments, alone in her mansion while the rest of Denver celebrated. Sophie found her at 2 a.m., still working in her home office. You're going to tell him tomorrow, right? After the hearing? Sophie leaned against the doorframe, looking younger than 17 in oversized pajamas. Because running away on Christmas Eve without explanation is pretty shitty. Language, Claire said automatically. You're literally destroying something good because you're scared. That's worth a swear word. Sophie crossed her arms. He likes you. Like actually likes you. Not your money or your company. When does that ever happen? It won't matter if he likes me when he finds out I've been lying to him about who I am for a week. Sophie was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think you're using the lies as an excuse. If you tell him and he gets mad, that's easier than telling him and having it work out, because then you'd have to actually let yourself be happy, and you don't think you deserve that. Claire stared at her daughter Ward's sister, stunned by the accuracy. When did you get so perceptive? I've had 4 years to watch you punish yourself for David's death. Gets pretty obvious after a while. Sophie pushed off the doorframe. Emma really wanted us to come for breakfast tomorrow. I told her we would, so win your stupid hearing and then fix things with Marcus, okay? Christmas morning arrived gray and cold, clouds threatening snow. Claire dressed in her most severe suit, black Armani, sharp enough to cut, and drove downtown to the courthouse at 8:30. Her legal team met her in the lobby, everyone grimly professional despite the holiday. The hearing was brutal. 3 hours of testimony and argument, the plaintiff's attorneys presenting emails and internal communications that looked damning when stripped of context. Claire testified under oath about timeline projections and construction delays and good faith business decisions that could be twisted into looking like intentional fraud if you wanted to see it that way. Judge Morrison, no relation to board member Alexandra, listened with a neutral expression of someone who'd seen every variation of corporate malfeasance. At 1 p.m., she called a recess for lunch, said she'd deliver her verdict at 3. Claire sat in the courthouse cafeteria with her attorneys, too nervous to eat. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Marcus and 3 text messages, increasingly concerned. "Emma's waiting for you. Is everything okay?" Then, "Claire, please just tell me you're safe. Finally, I'm worried about you. Call me when you can." She couldn't call, couldn't explain that she was sitting in federal court on Christmas Day fighting for her company's survival. Couldn't tell him that after this hearing, everything would change. Either she'd be vindicated and would have to explain why she'd hidden her identity, or she'd lose everything and wouldn't deserve him anyway. At 3 p.m., they reconvened. Judge Morrison delivered her verdict with the efficiency of someone who wanted to go home to her own Christmas dinner. The evidence didn't support fraud. The communications showed normal business practices and good faith estimates. The plaintiff's claims were dismissed with prejudice. Bennett Capital had won. Claire sat in stunned relief as her attorneys congratulated each other, and the plaintiff's team packed up in defeat. She'd won. The company was safe. Richard's contingency plans were moot. She would remain CEO. Outside the courthouse, Denver had started to snow, fat flakes that stuck to her hair and coat. Claire stood on the steps, breathing in cold air that tasted like freedom and victory, and the end of 4 years of constant crisis management. Her phone rang. Richard, probably calling to congratulate her and pretend he'd never tried to remove her. She let it go to voicemail. Got in her car, drove not toward Cherry Hills, but toward Aurora, toward Marcus's house and Emma's Christmas breakfast in the reckoning she'd been avoiding. Marcus opened the door before she could knock, Emma visible behind him in Christmas pajamas, face hopeful and confused. "I need to talk to you," Claire said. "I need to tell you everything." Marcus looked at her, really looked, taking in the severe suit and courthouse-perfect hair and whatever was visible in her expression. Something shifted in his eyes, understanding maybe, or the beginning of it. "Emma, go watch your movie," he said quietly. "Claire and I need to talk." They sat in his living room, the Christmas tree lights suddenly seeming too bright. Claire took a breath, prepared to demolish the foundation of everything they'd built over the past week. "My name is Claire Bennett," she started, "and I'm the CEO of Bennett Capital Management. It's a $200 million commercial real estate investment firm. I've been running it for 4 years since my husband died. The mansion in Cherry Hills is mine, not the downtown apartment I told you about. I make more money in a month than you probably make in a year, and I've been lying to you about all of it since the night we met." Marcus sat very still, processing. His expression went through stages: confusion, recognition, hurt, something harder to read. "The meeting yesterday," he said slowly, "the hearing today, that was about your company?" $15 million lawsuit, plaintiff claimed fraud on a development project. "The hearing was this morning. We won." Claire forced herself to meet his eyes. "And before you ask why I lied, I don't have a good answer. You sat down at my table and thought I was someone else, and for 20 minutes I got to be just Claire. Not CEO Bennett, not the ice queen of Denver business, just a woman having dinner. And I didn't want to lose that. So you let me think you were someone you're not." Marcus's voice was level but cold. Contractor's practicality applied to emotional crisis. "Let me tell you about my life and my daughter and my dead wife while pretending you were, what, regular person? Someone who understood normal people problems? I'm sorry. You're sorry." He stood, paced to the window back. "I told you things I haven't told anyone in 4 years. Brought you into my home, introduced you to my daughter, and the whole time you were lying about who you were. Not lying exactly. What would you call it?" He turned to face her, and the hurt in his eyes made Claire's chest ache. "You let me believe that we had something in common. 2 people who'd lost their partners, trying to figure out how to move forward. But we're not the same at all, are we, Bombay? You're a CEO in a mansion and I'm a foreman in Aurora. You probably make more in a week than I make in 6 months. And you let me think. He stopped, ran his hands through his hair. Claire watched him process the magnitude of her deception, watched him recalibrate everything they'd shared through the lens of this new information. I should have told you sooner, Claire said quietly. I wanted to, but every time I tried, I was afraid you'd look at me differently. That you'd see the money and the position and not the person. And I liked how you saw me before you knew. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that felt like goodbye. Emma's waiting for her Christmas breakfast. You should go. Marcus, please go, Claire. I need to think, and Emma doesn't need to see this. His face was carefully controlled, but Claire could see the hurt underneath. Merry Christmas. She left, drove home through Christmas Day snow that was beautiful and meaningless. Spent the rest of the day alone in her mansion while Sophie studiously avoided asking questions. At 9 p.m., curled up on her bed, still wearing the sooty she'd worn to court, Claire let herself cry for the first time since David died. Not for the hearing or the board or the company. For Marcus. For what she'd destroyed by being too afraid to be honest. Her phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. She'd won her legal battle and lost something more important in the process. December 26th arrived with the kind of brittle cold that made breath visible and turned Denver into a snow globe city. Claire woke in her Cherry Hills bedroom, having slept maybe 2 hours total, her eyes gritty and her chest hollow. The lawsuit victory felt Pyrrhic now. She'd saved her company and destroyed the first genuine connection she'd felt in 4 years. Sophie appeared in her doorway at 8 a.m., already dressed, expression unreadable. You're going to fix this, right? Not just lie in bed feeling sorry for yourself? Claire pulled the covers higher. He asked me to leave. I don't think there's anything to fix. So you're just giving up? The Claire Bennett who fought a $15 million lawsuit on Christmas Day is giving up because a guy needs time to process? Sophie crossed her arms, looking more like David in that moment than Claire could bear. That's pathetic. I lied to him for a week. Let him believe I was someone I'm not. That's not something you just apologize away. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, her weight making the mattress dip. You know what I think? I think you wanted this to happen. You wanted him to find out the worst way possible so you could use it as proof that you don't deserve to be happy. Self-sabotage is easier than actually trying. The accuracy hurt more than the words themselves. Claire sat up, pushed hair out of her face. When did you become so wise? I've had 4 years watching you build walls. Gets pretty obvious after a while. Sophie stood, headed for the door. Emma called me this morning. She's confused why you didn't come for Christmas breakfast. Why her dad's sad. You owe her an explanation even if you're too scared to face Marcus. After Sophie left, Claire lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Emma's confusion and Marcus's hurt and the way she'd fled his house like a coward. Sophie was right. She owed them better than silence. But the thought of facing Marcus again, seeing disappointment replace whatever had been growing between them, felt insurmountable. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Not Marcus, Jessica, her assistant, with a message that somehow made everything worse. Board meeting scheduled for January 2nd. Richard wants to discuss company direction now that lawsuit is resolved. I think he's still planning something. Victory was supposed to mean safety. Winning the lawsuit was supposed to secure her position. But Richard Chen didn't give up easily, and apparently losing one battle just meant regrouping for another. Claire closed her eyes against the exhaustion that went bone deep. The day passed in a haze. Claire worked from her home office, reviewing year-end reports and strategic plans, throwing herself into corporate minutiae to avoid thinking about Marcus. Sophie left around noon without explanation, returning hours later with Emma Sullivan in tow. We're having a sleepover, Sophie announced, Emma standing beside her looking uncertain but hopeful. Emma's spending the night. Dan dropped her off. He's Marcus's brother, does logistics for the construction company. Apparently Marcus is dealing with stuff and thought Emma could use a distraction. Emma looked up at Claire with those wide eyes that saw too much. Are you mad at my daddy? Claire's chest constricted. She knelt down to Emma's level, meeting her gaze directly. I'm not mad at your daddy. I'm the one who made a mistake. I wasn't honest with him about some important things, and he's hurt because of that. That's my fault, not his. He's been sad since Christmas. Emma's voice went small. He said you probably wouldn't come over anymore because grown-ups are complicated. But I liked having you and Sophie here. It felt like... She stopped, seeming to search for words. It felt less lonely. Claire pulled Emma into a hug, this child who'd already lost one mother and didn't deserve to lose another connection because Claire couldn't manage honesty. Over Emma's shoulder, she caught Sophie's eye. Her daughter-ward sister nodded slightly. Approval or encouragement, or both. Your daddy's not wrong that grown-ups are complicated, Claire managed, but that doesn't mean we can't figure things out. It just might take some time. Emma pulled back, studied Claire's face with the intensity of someone twice her age. My daddy really likes you. He was happier when you were around. I could tell because he smiled more and didn't look sad when he thought I wasn't watching. The simple observation landed like a blow. Claire thought about Marcus in his kitchen, teaching them to bake. Marcus in his workshop showing Emma and Sophie how to sand wood smooth. Marcus looking at her like she was someone worth knowing rather than someone worth networking with. She'd had that, had something real and uncomplicated, and she'd destroyed it with lies built on fear. Sophie rescued her from having to respond, pulling Emma toward the stairs. Come on, my room's up here. I'll show you my track medals and we can watch movies and eat too much junk food. Claire won't stop us because she feels guilty. That's manipulation, Claire called after them. That's effective parenting, Sophie shot back. Alone in the entryway of her mansion, Claire heard their voices drifting from upstairs. Emma's questions and Sophie's patient answers, the easy rapport they'd developed despite their age difference. She pulled out her phone, typed a message to Marcus before she could overthink it. Emma's here with Sophie for a sleepover. She's safe and happy. I'm sorry for everything. You deserved honesty from the start, and I should have been brave enough to give it to you. She hit send, waited. No response came. December 27th brought weather warnings scrolling across every channel. A massive storm system moving down from Canada, expected to hit Denver by evening. Potentially the worst blizzard in a decade. Schools were already announcing closures for the 28th. Businesses sending employees home early. The whole city preparing to hunker down. Claire spent the morning with Emma and Sophie, making breakfast and watching the girls work on a jigsaw puzzle that Sophie had started weeks ago and abandoned. Emma approached the puzzle with the same focused intensity she brought to everything, finding patterns and connections with surprising speed. She's going to be an architect, Sophie observed, watching Emma fit pieces together. Or an engineer, something that involves seeing how things work. My daddy says I think like my mommy did. Emma didn't look up from the puzzle. She was a teacher and she was really good at explaining complicated stuff. Daddy says I got her brain in his hands, which means I can understand things and also build them. Claire felt a familiar pang of grief adjacent to someone else's loss. Rachel Sullivan had been a teacher, had died the same night as David, and her daughter carried pieces of her forward in small observations and inherited talents. The cruelty of it, children who remembered their parents through fragments and stories rather than daily presence, never got easier to witness. Marcus texted around noon. Thanks for having Emma. Dan will pick her up around 4 if that works. And Claire, I'm not angry, just need some time to process everything. Not angry, but needing distance, which somehow felt worse. Claire typed 3 different responses and deleted them all, finally settling on 4 works. Take whatever time you need. Dan arrived at 4 exactly, a younger version of Marcus with the same solid build and careful manners. He thanked Claire for keeping Emma, mentioned that Marcus was dealing with some emergency planning for the storm, making sure job sites were secured, equipment protected, crew members who lived in rural areas sent home early. After Emma left, Sophie retreated to her room with her phone, leaving Claire alone with weather reports and the hollow feeling of having lost something before fully having it. She tried to work to review documents for the January 2nd board meeting, but concentration was impossible. The weather warnings were growing more urgent. Storm expected to hit by 7 p.m., possibly dumping 2 feet of snow, winds up to 50 miles per hour. Whiteout conditions. Her phone rang at 5:30. Not Marcus, but a Colorado Springs area code she didn't recognize. Miss Bennett, this is the front desk at the Marriott Colorado Springs. We have a Sophie Bennett checked in here who listed you as her emergency contact. She asked us to call because she's sick and needs... Wait, what? Claire's stomach dropped. Sophie's upstairs in her room. I'm looking at her driver's license right now, ma'am. She checked in 2 hours ago, says she has the flu, high fever, and needs someone to bring her medication. Claire took the stairs 2 at a time, burst into Sophie's room. Empty, bed made, overnight bag gone, note on the pillow. Went to visit CU Boulder campus for admitted students weekend. Back Sunday. Don't freak out. The date was wrong. Admitted students weekend wasn't until February. And Sophie wouldn't have left without permission unless something was seriously wrong. Claire grabbed her phone, called Sophie. It rang 4 times before a weak voice answered. Before you yell, I was going to tell you. I drove down to check out Boulder yesterday, stayed in a cheap hotel, woke up this morning feeling terrible. Fever, chills, the works. Managed to get to a better hotel, but I'm pretty much useless. I already called a doctor service. They said it's probably flu, gave me prescriptions. I'll be fine in a day or 2. You drove to Boulder without telling me? You're 17, Sophie, and you're sick in a hotel alone with a blizzard coming? Claire was already grabbing her keys, her coat. I'm coming to get you. Claire, there's a massive storm. The news says don't travel. I'm in a hotel with room service and HBO. I'll survive. Sophie's voice was weak but stubborn. You can come get me after the storm passes. Claire looked at her phone, 6:15 p.m. Colorado Springs was 90 minutes south on a good day, with the storm approaching, possibly longer. But Sophie was sick and alone, and the idea of leaving her in a hotel room while the worst blizzard in a decade hit was impossible to accept. I'm leaving now. Stay in your room. Keep your phone charged. I'll text you when I'm close. Claire, seriously, I'm fine. Claire hung up, was moving before logic could stop her. Threw essentials in a bag, clothes, toiletries, Sophie's medications from the bathroom cabinet. The weather warnings were getting more urgent. Storm expected to hit Denver by 7, already affecting northern Colorado. She had maybe an hour before conditions became dangerous. Her Mercedes cut through early evening traffic, most people already home preparing for the storm. The highway was emptying out, the smart ones having already taken shelter. Claire pushed the speedometer higher than was wise, watching dark clouds roll in from the north like a closing fist. She made it to Castle Rock, halfway, before the snow started. Not gentle flakes, but aggressive walls of white that reduced visibility to almost nothing. The highway became a tunnel of headlights and brake lights, everyone slowing to a crawl. Claire's hands tightened on the wheel, windshield wipers working frantically to clear the accumulation. By Monument, the storm was fully formed. Wind rocked the Mercedes, snow coming so thick that the car in front of her became just red taillights in white chaos. Claire's phone was going crazy with emergency alerts. Roads closing, whiteout conditions, warnings to shelter in place. But Sophie was 40 miles south, sick and alone, and turning back wasn't an option. Colorado Springs appeared through the snow like a mirage. Claire had never been so grateful to see city lights. The Marriott sat off the highway, warmly lit and solid. She parked in the garage, grabbed her bag, and fought through wind to the lobby. Sophie's room was on the 3rd floor. Claire knocked, heard weak shuffling, then the door opened to reveal her daughter Ward's sister wrapped in a hotel robe, face flushed with fever, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in years. You actually drove through the blizzard. Sophie's voice carried equal parts gratitude and exasperation. That was stupid. Get back in bed before you fall over. Claire pushed into the room, set her bag down, pressed her palm to Sophie's forehead. Hot enough to be concerning but not emergency level. When did this start? Yesterday afternoon, thought it was just being tired from the drive. Sophie climbed back into bed, pulled the covers up. By this morning, I could barely move. Got prescriptions filled, took the first dose around noon. Doctor said it's definitely flu, just needs to run its course. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing Sophie's hair back the way she used to when Sophie was 13 and new to their household. Still grieving David and uncertain about this woman who'd married her father and then inherited her through tragedy's calculus. You should have told me you were driving down here. What if you'd gotten sick on the road? What if— I know. It was dumb. Sophie closed her eyes, exhausted. I just wanted to see the campus, make it feel real. TU Boulder, full scholarship, pre-med track. It's everything I have been working for. And I wanted to see it without you there being CEO Bennett and making everything official and complicated. Just wanted to be Sophie checking out college. Claire understood that impulse more than she could say. The need to be just yourself without the weight of titles and expectations. How long have you been hiding the scholarship? Sophie's eyes opened, something guilty in her expression. It came last week. Full academic and athletic, covers everything. I already accepted. Why hide it? Because— Sophie stopped, struggled with words. Because I know you were planning to pay for college. You've been setting aside money, making sure I'd have that security. And this scholarship means you don't have to do that. Means I'm not costing you anything. But telling you felt like I was saying I didn't need you anymore. And I do need you, just not your money. The confession landed with unexpected weight. 4 years of careful distance, of Sophie maintaining independence as protection against potential loss. And underneath it all, she'd been terrified of becoming a burden. Claire pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of the fever. You have never been a key to— You've been— Claire's voice broke. You've been the only thing that kept me from disappearing into work completely after David died. The only reason I came home at night instead of sleeping in my office. You made me be a person instead of just a CEO. Sophie clung to her, and they stayed like that while the storm howled outside and Denver descended into chaos 90 miles north. Claire's phone started buzzing around 8 p.m. She'd texted Jessica her location. Stuck in Colorado Springs until the storm passed, would be back for the January 2nd meeting. But these notifications weren't about work. They were news alerts, increasingly urgent. Interstate 25 closed northbound. Highway 85 impassable. Denver metro area under complete travel ban. Then, at 8:47 p.m., her phone rang. Marcus. Claire's heart jumped as she answered. Claire. His voice was raw, stripped of everything except fear. I need— Emma's school bus is stuck on Interstate 70, near the mountain pass. The same stretch of highway where Rachel died. The same location that had haunted them both for 4 years. Claire felt ice run through her veins that had nothing to do with the blizzard. Tell me what happened. School let out early because of the storm. The buses were supposed to beat it, but the show came faster than predicted. Emma's bus got caught on 70 near the pass. They're stuck. Highways closed both directions. Plows can't get through. She's safe for now. They have heat, but— His voice cracked. It's the same place, Claire. The same fucking place where Rachel— Marcus. Claire kept her voice steady even as her own panic rose. Emma's going to be okay. They have professionals with them. Heat, probably supplies. This isn't the same situation. I can't get to her. I tried. Police have the roads blocked. They said emergency crews are working on it, but it could be hours. And I'm stuck here, and my daughter is on that highway, and I can't— He broke off, and Claire heard the sound of someone trying not to fall apart completely. She stood, paced to the window. The storm was fully formed now, snow so thick she couldn't see the parking lot below. Where exactly are they stuck? Which mile marker? Marcus gave her the details. About 15 miles west of Denver, near the base of the mountain pass, right where Interstate 70 started its climb into serious elevation. Claire's mind was already calculating. Colorado Springs to that location was about 80 miles if she went north through Denver, but the Denver metro area was shut down completely. Alternative routes existed, back roads through the mountains, county highways that might not be blocked, but they'd be dangerous in this weather. She looked at Sophie, asleep in the hotel bed, fever-flushed but stable, looked at her phone showing road closures and emergency warnings, looked out at the storm that every rational voice said not to drive through. I'm in Colorado Springs, she heard herself say. I came down because Sophie got sick. I can try to reach them from this direction. Take 24 west, cut through to 70. It's back roads and mountain passes, but it might be open. Claire, no, that's insane. You can't drive through this. Your daughter is on that highway. Our daughters, Emma and Sophie, have been talking about being sisters. That little girl matters to me." Claire was already moving, grabbing her coat, her keys. "I'm going. Text me the exact location and the bus number." "Claire, please, I can't. If something happens to you." "Nothing's going to happen." Claire didn't believe it but said it anyway. Said it with enough conviction that maybe Marcus would believe it, even if she didn't. "I'll get to Emma, I promise." She hung up before he could argue more, before her own fear could talk her out of it. Sophie stirred as Claire moved around the room. "Where are you going?" Sophie's voice was thick with sleep and fever. "Emma's stuck on Interstate 70, same place Rachel died. Marcus can't get to her, roads are blocked from Denver, but I can approach from here, back roads through the mountains. I'm going to get her." Sophie pushed herself up on her elbows, fever-bright eyes sharp with concern. "That's crazy. You'll get stuck too, and then Marcus will have his daughter and you both in danger." "I can't leave her there." Claire was putting on layers, preparing for worst-case scenarios. "She's 8 years old and terrified and stuck on the highway where her mother died. I can help." "This is about more than helping Emma." Sophie's voice cut through Claire's frantic preparation. "This is about proving to Marcus that you're not the person who lies and runs away. This is about redemption." The accuracy stung. Claire stopped, met Sophie's eyes. "Maybe it is, but that doesn't make it wrong." Sophie studied her for a long moment, then reached for her phone. "Text me every 15 minutes. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling Highway Patrol and reporting you missing." "And Claire," she paused, "don't die trying to prove something. Emma needs you alive, not heroic." Claire squeezed Sophie's hand, promised to be careful, and walked out into the storm. The Mercedes handled snow better than most sedans, but this was beyond normal winter driving. Claire took Highway 24 west from Colorado Springs, the road immediately becoming treacherous. Wind buffeted the road, snow piling up faster than the wipers could clear it. She passed exactly 3 other vehicles in the first 30 minutes. Emergency vehicles with lights flashing, heading towards some other crisis. Her phone showed the road. 24 west to Woodland Park, then north on 67 through the mountains to connect with 70. About 70 miles of increasingly dangerous road that might not even be passable. But it was away from Denver's closed highways, away from the official blockades, and it was the only chance of reaching Emma. The first hour was pure concentration, watching for ice patches, navigating curves where the road disappeared into white, maintaining speed steady enough to keep momentum, but slow enough to stay controlled. Claire's hands ached from gripping the wheel. Her eyes burned from staring into snow-filled headlights. But she kept going, kept thinking about Emma wrapped in an emergency blanket on a bus, wondering where her father was. Woodland Park appeared at 10:15 p.m., a small mountain town mostly dark and shuttered against the storm. Claire stopped at a gas station, one of the few businesses with lights still on. Inside, the clerk looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You're not seriously planning to keep going? 67's going to be worse, higher elevation, less traffic, probably not plowed." The clerk was maybe 20, local kid who knew these mountains better than any GPS. "I have to get to Interstate 70. A school bus is stuck there with my—" Claire paused, realizing the truth of what she was about to say. "With my daughter." The clerk softened slightly. "Take 67 slow. There's a section about 20 miles north where it gets narrow. That's where most people get stuck." "You got chains for your tires?" Claire hadn't even thought about chains. The clerk sold her a set, showed her how to install them in the parking lot while snow accumulated on their shoulders. By the time Claire got back on the road, it was past 11, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Highway 67 North was everything the clerk warned about and worse. The road climbed through forests so dense that headlights barely penetrated, curves appearing with almost no warning. Claire's phone showed elevation increasing. 8,000 feet, 80,500, 9,000. The air itself seemed thinner, the cold more vicious. Twice she felt the Mercedes slide despite the chains, tires searching for purchase on ice hidden under snow. At 11:45, she hit the narrow section. The road squeezed between rock face and steep drop-off, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles if they were being optimistic. Claire crept forward at 15 miles per hour, every muscle tense, watching for anything that might indicate danger ahead. Her phone buzzed. Sophie. Still alive? Claire called her, put it on speaker. Still driving? Made it through Woodland Park on 67 heading towards 70. Probably another 40 minutes if I don't get stuck. Marcus has been texting me. Sophie's voice carried concern and something else. Approval, maybe. Asking if you're okay, if I've heard from you. I think he's losing his mind. Emma's still safe on the bus, but everyone's getting cold. They're running the engine intermittently to conserve fuel. Tell him I'm getting close. Claire navigated a particularly nasty curve, felt the back end slide slightly before the chains caught. Tell Emma her father loves her and help is coming. Claire? Sophie's voice went quiet. You know this is insane, right? Driving through the worst storm in a decade on mountain roads to rescue a kid you've known for a week? I know. Good. Just wanted to make sure you understood the magnitude of your own crazy. Sophie paused. I'm proud of you. This is the most human thing I've seen you do in 4 years. The words landed somewhere deep in Claire's chest. She'd spent 4 years being CEO Bennett, being the ice queen who could survive board coups and lawsuits and corporate warfare. But she'd forgotten how to be Claire, who did brave, stupid things because they were right rather than strategic. Get some sleep, Claire managed. I'll text when I get there. Highway 67 finally intersected with Interstate 70 at Silverthorne, dropping down from the mountains to rejoin civilization. The interstate was closed officially, but not physically blocked this far west. No police barricades, just empty pavement under feet of snow. Claire turned east, following the road toward Denver, watching for any sign of the stranded bus. She found them at 12:40 a.m., a cluster of emergency lights barely visible through the snow. The school bus sat jackknifed across 2 lanes, surrounded by fire trucks and highway patrol vehicles that must have fought their way up from the west. Claire pulled over, grabbed the emergency blanket from her trunk, and fought through thigh-deep snow toward the bus. A firefighter intercepted her before she reached it. Ma'am, you can't be here. Road's closed, and we're in the middle of evacuating these kids. I'm here for Emma Sullivan. Her father asked me to... Claire stopped, realized how absurd that sounded. I drove from Colorado Springs. I need to see her. The firefighter studied her, probably seeing expensive coat and designer boots completely inappropriate for blizzard rescue. But something in Claire's expression must have convinced him because he gestured toward the bus. Sullivan's the little girl with dark hair, kept asking when her dad was coming. She's inside with the others, waiting for the warming vehicles. We're transporting them in waves to the fire station. Claire climbed onto the bus, emergency lighting, casting everything in harsh angles. 20 children ranging from kindergarten through 5th grade sat wrapped in emergency blankets, most looking more bored than scared at this point. Emma sat near the back, squeezed between 2 older kids, her face pale but composed until she saw Claire. You came! Emma's composure shattered into 8-year-old relief. She lunged out of her seat, wrapped her arms around Claire's waist. Daddy said you were stuck in Colorado Springs with Sophie. How did you get here? I drove. Claire knelt down, checked Emma over automatically. Cold, but not dangerously so. Scared, but holding together. Your dad's waiting for you. He wanted to be here himself, but the roads from Denver were completely blocked. So I came instead. Through the storm, Emma's eyes went wide. That's really dangerous. Daddy says you should never drive in blizzards because you can't see and you might crash like... She stopped, face crumpling, as the location and its history caught up with her. Claire pulled Emma close, feeling the child shake with suppressed tears. You're safe. Your mom would be so proud of how brave you've been. The firefighters loaded kids into heated vehicles in groups of 5, prioritizing the youngest first. Emma clung to Claire's hand through the whole process, refusing to let go even when they tried to separate them for transport. Finally, one of the firefighters, older woman with kind eyes, made an exception. You can ride with her to the fire station. Her father's meeting us there. The transport vehicle was warm and cramped. Emma pressed against Claire's side while 3 other children chattered about their adventure with the resilience of youth. Claire texted Sophie. Found Emma, both safe, heading to fire station. Then before she could overthink it, Marcus, I have Emma. She's safe. We're going to Fire Station 12 near the highway. She's cold and scared, but unharmed. His response came immediately. Thank you, I'm already there. I've been waiting. Claire, thank you. Fire Station 12 was controlled chaos. Parents arriving to collect children, firefighters processing paperwork, coffee and hot chocolate flowing freely. Claire walked in with Emma attached to her side and spotted Marcus immediately. He stood near the back, still wearing his construction work clothes, face haggard with fear and relief. Emma saw him and ran, crashed into him with the force of someone who'd been holding terror at bay through sheer determination. Marcus dropped to his knees, wrapped his daughter in his arms, and Claire watched his shoulders shake with sobs he had probably been suppressing since the first call about the bus. Claire stayed back, giving them space, suddenly aware of how she must look. Hair wild from wind, coat soaked, boots caked with snow. She'd driven 80 miles through mountain passes in the worst blizzard in a decade, and now that Emma was safe, the adrenaline was draining away, leaving only exhaustion. Marcus finally looked up, met Claire's eyes over Emma's head. The raw gratitude in his expression made her chest ache. You drove from Colorado Springs, through the storm, for Emma. His voice was rough with emotion. I couldn't leave her here. Claire took a step forward, then stopped, uncertain of her welcome despite everything. Marcus, Daddy, Claire drove through the mountains, and it was really dangerous, but she came anyway because she knew I was scared. Emma pulled back from her father, looked between them with the perceptive understanding of children who see what adults try to hide. Are you still mad at her? Because she drove through a blizzard to help me, so maybe you could not be mad anymore? Marcus stood, his hand still on Emma's shoulder. I was never mad, just... He looked at Claire, something shifting in his expression. Just scared, of being hurt again, of letting someone in who might leave. I'm not leaving. The words came out with more certainty than Claire had felt about anything in years. I drove 80 miles through mountain roads in whiteout conditions because Emma mattered enough to risk it. Because you matter, because this... She gestured between them, encompassing everything they'd built and broken and were maybe rebuilding. This is worth fighting for. Emma tugged her father's sleeve. Daddy, I'm really tired, and also I need to use the bathroom, and maybe we could have this conversation somewhere that isn't a fire station with a lot of people watching. Marcus laughed, the sound breaking tension. Yeah, kiddo, let's get you home. They couldn't go home, not immediately. Interstate 70 was still closed eastbound. Denver's road ban remained in effect. The fire station was setting up temporary shelter for stranded drivers, cots and blankets in the garage bay. Marcus signed Emma out of official custody, and they found themselves sitting in the station's break room, drinking terrible coffee while Emma fell asleep on a cot nearby, exhausted by fear and relief in equal measure. I need to tell you something. Marcus spoke quietly, watching Emma sleep. When you told me you were a CEO, that you'd been lying about who you were, I wasn't angry about the money. I was angry because I thought it meant we couldn't work, that we were too different from two different worlds. Claire waited, letting him work through whatever he needed to say. But watching you drive through a blizzard for my daughter, that's not something a CEO does. That's something a person who actually cares does. And I realized I was wrong. Marcus turned to face her fully. You're not your job title or your money or the mansion you live in. You're the woman who made cookies with Emma and listened to me talk about Rachel without offering empty platitudes. You're the person who drove 80 miles through mountains in a storm because a little girl needed help. That's who you actually are. I should have told you the truth from the start. Claire needed to say it, needed him to understand. I was afraid you'd treat me differently if you knew, that you'd see the money and the position and not the person. But that fear doesn't excuse the deception. No, it doesn't. Marcus was quiet for a moment. But I understand it now, and I'm sorry too for kicking you out on Christmas without hearing you out, for making you feel like honesty would cost you everything. We're quite a pair, Claire said, both so scared of being hurt that we nearly destroyed something good before it barely started. Marcus reached across the small space between them, took her hand in his. The carpenter's calluses felt familiar now, real in a way that corporate handshakes and business transactions never had. Claire Bennett. He said her name like he was testing its weight, seeing how it fit with everything else he knew about her. CEO, liar, Christmas cookie decorator, blizzard rescuer. Who are you really? I'm someone who spent 4 years hiding behind work and money and corporate armor. Someone who met a man at the wrong table and remembered what it felt like to be seen as human. Claire squeezed his hand. Someone who's tired of being afraid. Then stop being afraid. Marcus pulled her closer, wrapped his free arm around her shoulders. Let yourself have this. Let us try on. They sat like that while Emma slept nearby and the storm gradually lessened outside. Around 4 a.m., Highway Patrol announced that Interstate 70 was reopening eastbound. Plows had cleared the main lanes. Conditions were still dangerous, but passable with caution. Marcus woke Emma gently, and they made the careful drive back to Denver in convoy with other stranded travelers. Claire followed Marcus's truck through pre-dawn darkness, snow-covered roads reflecting emergency lights. When they reached Aurora, pulling up to Marcus's house as the sun rose on December 29th, Emma was awake enough to demand that Claire come inside. We need to make breakfast, and you need to tell us stories about driving through the mountains, and also I think maybe you should stay because it's still really snowy and driving more would be dangerous. Emma's logic was exhausting but impossible to argue with. Inside, the house was warm and familiar. Marcus made coffee while Emma curled up on the couch with a blanket, and Claire called Sophie to check in. Her daughter Ward's sister answered, sounding marginally better. You actually did it, drove through the mountains and rescued Emma. Sophie's voice carried wonder and affection. Marcus called me about an hour ago, said you were both safe and heading back to Denver. He sounded, I don't know, different, happier. How are you feeling? Fever broke around 2 a.m. I'm still weak, but definitely better. The doctor said I should be fine to travel by tomorrow afternoon. Sophie paused. You're staying there, right? At Marcus's? Because if you come back here right now after everything that just happened, I'm disowning you. Claire looked at Marcus in the kitchen, at Emma bundled on the couch, at the life they represented, messy and complicated and real in ways her mansion had never been. I'm staying. They spent the day in comfortable exhaustion, Emma alternating between naps and detailed retellings of the bus incident. Marcus made breakfast while Claire dozed on the couch, her body finally understanding that the crisis was over and demanding rest. When she woke, Emma had curled up beside her, small and warm and trusting in sleep. Marcus sat in the chair across from them, watching with an expression Claire couldn't quite read. What? She asked quietly, trying not to wake Emma. Just thinking about how much changed in a week, how you went from wrong table stranger to, he paused, to this, whatever this is. What do you want it to be? Marcus considered the question seriously. I want to date you properly. Want to introduce you to people as my girlfriend, not hide or pretend we're something simpler than we are. Want Emma to know you're going to be around, that she can depend on you. Want to figure out how your CEO life and my construction foreman life fit together without either of us pretending to be something we're not. That sounds terrifying and complicated, Claire said. Yeah, Marcus smiled, but also worth it. Emma stirred, blinked awake, looked between them with sleepy perception. Are you two done being complicated grown-ups? Because I'm hungry, and also Sophie texted me and she's feeling better, and she says we should all celebrate New Year's Eve together. Sophie texted you? Claire pulled out her phone, found messages from her daughter coordinating with Emma about party plans. When did you two exchange numbers? At the sleepover, obviously. Emma sat up, stretching. We're basically sisters now, so we needed to be able to talk. Sophie says we should have a party with movies and snacks and staying up until midnight, and I think that's a good idea. Marcus looked at Claire, eyebrow raised in question. She thought about her empty mansion, about the January 2nd board meeting where Richard would try whatever new maneuver he'd planned, about the corporate life waiting to reclaim her. Thought about how she'd rather spend New Year's Eve in this small house with these people than anywhere else. A party sounds perfect, Claire said. December 31st arrived clear and cold, the blizzard having blown itself out and left Denver sparkling under fresh snow. Sophie felt well enough to drive back from Colorado Springs, arriving at Marcus's house in the early afternoon with bags of snacks and decorations that Emma immediately commandeered. The two girls transformed the living room into something between a New Year's party and a blanket fort, stringing lights and arranging pillows with careful attention to comfort and aesthetics. Marcus and Claire watched from the kitchen, ostensibly preparing food, but mostly observing the unlikely friendship developing between an 8-year-old and a 17-year-old. They're good for each other, Marcus observed. Emma hasn't had someone to look up to like this. Sophie's patient with her, but doesn't talk down to her. And Sophie, he paused. She seems lighter somehow, less guarded. Claire nodded, thinking about Sophie's years of careful distance and self-sufficiency. She's been scared of needing anyone after David died. Scared of being a burden or getting attached to something that might go away. But Emma she doesn't know how to do distance. She pulls people in and makes them want to stay. That's Rachel's gift, Marcus said quietly. Emma got her mother's ability to make people feel seen and valued. It's why her students loved her. She made every kid feel like they mattered. They prepared food while the girls decorated, falling into an easy rhythm that felt practiced despite its novelty. Claire sliced vegetables while Marcus assembled a cheese board, their movements coordinated without discussion. At some point, Sophie appeared in the kitchen, studied them with her characteristic perception. "You two figured it out," she said. Not a question. "We're working on it," Claire replied. "Good, because watching you self-sabotage was exhausting." Sophie grabbed crackers from the pantry. "Emma wants to know if we can stay up past midnight to watch movies. I told her it was up to you, but I'm clearly the cool sister who says yes to everything, so..." "Cool sister?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "We established the sister hierarchy. I'm the cool older sister who gives good advice but can't cook. You're the mom sister who worries too much but saved Emma from a blizzard, so you're also kind of cool. Emma's the baby sister who's weirdly wise but still believes in Santa. It's a whole thing. We have rules." Marcus laughed, and Claire felt something warm spread through her chest. Her carefully controlled life was being invaded by an 8-year-old's earnest enthusiasm and a teenager's dry wit, and she'd never been happier about losing control. They ate dinner on the living room floor because Emma insisted it was more festive. Pizza and vegetables and cheese that Emma arranged into what she called artistic patterns that mostly just meant random placement. Sophie taught Emma some kind of hand-clapping game that dissolved into giggles. And Marcus told stories about construction site mishaps that had Emma demanding to visit job sites when school resumed. As midnight approached, they settled in to watch movies Emma had selected with what she termed sophisticated taste, which meant animated films with enough emotional depth to make adults cry. Claire found herself wedged between Sophie and Emma on the couch, Marcus in the chair nearby, and thought about how her life had shifted in less than 2 weeks. At 11:58, Emma insisted they count down properly with noisemakers she'd produced from somewhere. They stood in the living room, the four of them, watching the ball drop on television and shouting the countdown with enthusiasm that felt silly and perfect. "Happy New Year!" Emma threw her arms around Claire first, then Sophie, then her father. "This is the best New Year's ever because we're all together and nobody's alone." Marcus pulled Claire close as the clock struck midnight, kissed her properly for the first time. Not a chaste brush on the cheek or a desperate clinch in crisis, but a real kiss that tasted like promise. In beginning, and the future they were building, despite all the ways they'd nearly destroyed it. "Happy New Year, Claire Bennett," he murmured against her lips. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Claire thought about the board meeting in 2 days, about the challenges of merging their different worlds, about all the complications that lay ahead, thought about how much easier it would be to retreat to the safety of her mansion and her corporate armor. "Ready," she said, and meant it. January 2nd came too quickly. Claire sat in Bennett Capital's conference room wearing her sharpest suit, hair pulled back severely, every inch the CEO who'd just won a $15 million lawsuit. Richard Chen sat across from her with his usual allies, and this time she was prepared for whatever move he'd planned. "Before we begin," Claire started, taking control before Richard could launch into whatever speech he'd prepared, "I have an announcement. Effective immediately, I'm creating a new position, Chief Financial Officer. We've needed dedicated financial oversight for years, and our recent legal victory demonstrated how critical strong financial management is to the company's future." Richard's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe calculation about what this meant for his plans. I've already identified the ideal candidate, Claire continued. Someone with extensive experience in commercial real estate finance, strong analytical skills, and the kind of strategic thinking we need for our next phase of growth. She pulled out a portfolio, slid it across the table. Her credentials are outlined here. I'd like to present her for board approval at our next regular meeting, but wanted to give everyone advance notice of the structural change. Margaret Holloway scanned the document, nodded appreciatively. Impressive background. Where's she coming from? Currently working as an independent consultant, but she's interested in a permanent position with growth potential. I've offered her a salary of $95,000 with standard benefits package and performance bonuses tied to company growth. Claire met Richard's eyes. I'd appreciate the board's support in strengthening our financial infrastructure. Unless there are concerns about this strategic direction, Richard couldn't argue against better financial oversight without looking like he opposed sound business practices. He nodded slowly. Sounds prudent. I look forward to meeting her. The rest of the meeting covered routine business, year-end reports, upcoming projects, Q1 projections. Claire maintained her CEO composure throughout, but inside she was smiling. She'd turned Richard's own strategy against him. Instead of being pushed out, she was expanding her team, strengthening her position, and solving a real business need in the process. After the meeting, she called the number she'd been saving for this moment. Claire? The voice that answered carried warmth and curiosity in equal measure. Someone she'd only spoken with twice, but who'd made an impression through persistence and professionalism. Autumn Reed, this is Claire Bennett from Bennett Capital Management. We met briefly at Evergreen Steakhouse, though under somewhat unusual circumstances. Autumn laughed. The wrong table blind date incident. I've told that story about 50 times. It's my favorite dating disaster anecdote. How can I help you? You mentioned you're a senior accountant currently looking for new opportunities. I have a position that might interest you. Chief Financial Officer at a commercial real estate investment firm. It would involve comprehensive financial oversight, strategic planning, working directly with the CEO and board. Are you interested in discussing it? They talked for 40 minutes about the position, about Autumn's background and aspirations, about Bennett Capital's needs and growth trajectory. By the time they hung up, Claire had scheduled an interview for the following week and felt confident she'd found exactly the right person for the role. Marcus called around 6, his voice carrying exhaustion and satisfaction. How'd the board meeting go? I created a CFO position and turned what was supposed to be Richard's ambush into a strategic expansion. Also potentially hired the woman whose blind date I crashed. Claire heard the smile in her own voice. How was your day? Spent 8 hours on a job site in 20-degree weather trying to make up for time lost to the blizzard. My fingers are frozen, I smell like sawdust and sweat. Want to come over for dinner? I promise I'll shower first. Claire looked around her home office, sleek and professional, and suddenly feeling like a party rather than a sanctuary. She'd been living here since the blizzard rescue, hadn't spent more than a few hours in her Cherry Hills mansion, and was starting to realize that the space she'd thought of as home had never really felt like one. I'll be there in an hour. The months that followed were messy and complicated and more fulfilling than anything Claire had experienced in years. She split her time between the mansion and Marcus's house, Emma and Sophie developing their sister hierarchy into something genuine and lasting. Sophie started taking Emma to CU Boulder track practices, letting the younger girl watch collegiate athletes train and dream about her own future. Emma taught Sophie how to bake with the patience of someone who genuinely loved teaching, and Sophie discovered she had more tolerance for an 8-year-old's endless questions than she'd ever expected. Autumn Reed joined Bennett Capital in February as CFO and proved immediately valuable, her analytical mind and attention to detail catching inefficiencies that Claire's broader strategic focus had missed. Within 3 months, she'd streamlined their financial operations enough to increase profit margins by 4%, earning Richard Chen's grudging respect and Margaret Holloway's enthusiastic praise. Marcus met Claire's corporate world with the same calm competence he brought to construction sites, attending a charity gala in March that had Claire worried he'd feel out of place. Instead, he charmed half the room with stories about building projects and asked genuinely interested questions about real estate development that made several potential investors remember why they'd gotten into the business in the first place. "You're good at this," Claire told him afterward, standing in her mansion foyer still dressed in evening wear. "The corporate socializing thing. I thought you'd hate it." "I did hate it," Marcus admitted, loosening his tie. "But watching you work a room, seeing you in your element, that was worth the uncomfortable shoes and small talk." He pulled her close. "I like watching you be powerful. It's attractive." By summer, the board had stopped questioning Claire's leadership. The lawsuit victory had been followed by successful project launches and strategic acquisitions that increased company value by 30%. Richard Chen still maneuvered and politicked, but his power to threaten her position had eroded as her results spoke louder than his concerns. Sophie left for CU Boulder in August, tearful but excited, promising Emma they'd talk every day and visit every weekend. Emma handled the separation better than expected, probably because by then she'd started calling Claire by the title Sophie had invented. Mom, Sister Claire, who worries too much. It wasn't mom, but it was something, a space being carved out for connection that honored Rachel's memory while allowing room for new relationships. Claire found herself spending more time at Marcus's house than her own, the mansion feeling increasingly like a museum of a life she'd moved beyond. In October, standing in the Cherry Hills master bedroom, looking at furniture that had once belonged to her and David, she made a decision. "I'm selling it," she told Sophie during their weekly video call. "The mansion. It's too big and too empty, and I never wanted to live there anyway. That was David's dream house." Sophie nodded, unsurprised. "Where will you live?" "I don't know yet. Maybe find something smaller. Maybe—" Claire paused. "Maybe see where things go with Marcus and Emma. We're not ready to officially move in together, but we're heading that direction." "About time," Sophie said. "Emma's been planning your wedding for months. She has a binder." "She's 8. She's determined. There's a seating chart and everything." December arrived with the kind of crystalline cold that made the mountains sharp and clear against blue sky. A year since the wrong table meeting, since the blizzard rescue, since everything had changed in the span of 2 chaotic weeks. Claire drove to work past Christmas decorations and thought about how different this December felt from the last one. How much lighter, how much more alive. Marcus called around 11. "Can you meet me for lunch? There's something I want to show you." They met at Evergreen Steakhouse, Maya Torres greeting them with the warm recognition of someone who'd witnessed their entire messy beginning. She led them to the corner table where it had all started, now decorated for Christmas with small evergreen branches and white lights. "1 year ago," Marcus said, sliding into the seat across from Claire, "I sat at the wrong table and met someone who changed everything. And I let you believe I was someone else," Claire added, "and we almost destroyed it before it started. But we didn't." Marcus reached across the table, took her hand in his. Those carpenter's calluses were familiar now, beloved, a tactile reminder of who he was and what he valued. "We figured it out, and I realized something this year, that second chances don't come along often. That finding someone who sees you for who you really are is rare enough that you fight for it." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Claire's breath caught. Claire Elizabeth Bennett, CEO, Blizzard rescuer, Emma's mom, sister who worries too much. Marcus opened the box to reveal a ring, simple and elegant, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that caught the Christmas lights. "Will you marry me? Will you officially join our messy, complicated, beautiful family, and let us join yours?" Claire looked at the ring, at Marcus's hopeful expression, at Maya watching from behind the bar with tears in her eyes. Thought about the year they had had, the obstacles they had overcome, the life they were building, despite all the ways it didn't fit conventional patterns. "Yes," she said, and felt the word resonate through her entire body. Yes to all of it. Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, stood to pull her into a kiss while the restaurant's lunchtime crowd applauded, and Maya brought champagne she'd apparently been keeping on ice. Emma appeared from somewhere. Marcus had clearly planned this, shrieking with joy and demanding to see the ring and announcing that her wedding binder was going to be extremely useful now. Sophie called minutes later, Emma having immediately texted her. "Congratulations, Mom, Sister Claire. Try not to stress plan the whole thing, okay? Let Emma and Marcus help." That evening, standing in Marcus's small house that had somehow become home, Claire looked at the ring on her finger and thought about wrong tables and right people. about lies told from fear and truths learned through crisis, about the difference between the life she thought she wanted and the one she was actually building. You know what I learned this year? She said to Marcus while Emma showed Sophie the ring via video chat, that the best things in life are the ones you don't plan for, the ones that come from sitting at the wrong table and being brave enough to stay. Marcus wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on her shoulder. Here's to wrong tables and right people. To second chances, Claire added. To family, Emma chimed in. To not being alone anymore, Sophie finished. Outside, Denver prepared for another Christmas season. Inside, surrounded by people who'd become family through choice rather than blood, Claire felt something she'd forgotten was possible. The profound peace of being exactly where she belonged.